Hello and welcome everyone. I see we're all now here in the same space. I'm honored to welcome you all today to this webinar called Why is Canada Arming Saudi Arabia's War in Yemen, hosted by the Canada Stop Arming Saudi campaign. We are a campaign informally made up of individuals and organizations across so-called Canada who have really come together for the direct purpose of stopping the Canadian government's ongoing arms trade with Saudi Arabia, which we know is fueling the war in Yemen. My name is Rachel Small, and I work at World Beyond War, a global movement to abolish war and establish a just and sustainable peace. I'm thrilled to see that we are being joined here tonight by people from across Turtle Island, from all coasts and everywhere in between. I looked at the registrations right before we started and noted that while a majority of us here are in so-called Canada, many are also joining from Yemen, from the United States, and their audience members in at least 7 other countries joining us as well. So welcome everyone. I myself am based in Toronto, which, like many of the cities people here are joining from, is one that is built on stolen Indigenous land. It's land that is the ancestral territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe peoples. It's land that needs to be given back. For all of us joining from so-called Canada, I want to start by noting the foundational war of this country is, of course, one of colonization. And frankly, we cannot talk about militarism or our arms trade with other countries without talking about the colonial violence, historic and present, that's at the very heart of these problems. And specifically today, I need to take a minute right now to acknowledge the huge amount of collective trauma and grief across Turtle Island today and yesterday due to the discovery by the Tecumloops Secwepemc Nation confirming that the bodies of 215 children were buried at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School site in BC, a residential school which closed just in 1978. I mean, while the deaths were known by the communities impacted, the sheer number of children that were killed is a shocking discovery, many as young as 3 years old, but also the discovery that the murder of those 215 children in a government-run school was covered up by so many people in power over so many years. I know for me as a mother to a very young child, I can scarcely bear to think about what this must feel like. And this is the political climate right here, right now, as we begin this event. So I would ask us all to take a silent pause for a few seconds as we send our thoughts, our love to Indigenous people across Turtle Island today, and acknowledge this ongoing trauma, what's really a never-ending devastation of the Indian residential school system, and the ongoing colonization across these lands. May they rest in power. I also want to note that's clearly documented that Canada's systems of genocide and apartheid against Indigenous people were used here and were exported to South Africa and used in the apartheid there, were also adopted by Israel to be used against Palestinians. And so regardless of what many of us have been taught in school about how Canada is a peacekeeping nation, in quotes, the murder of Secwepemc children, of children in Gaza, children in Yemen, this is all deeply connected. And in recognition of these connections, one thing I'm thrilled to share is that Mohammed from the Palestinian Youth Movement will in fact be doing the live interpretation for one of our speakers, Ahmed Jahaf, in this webinar. So thank you to Mohammed, to the Palestinian Youth Movement, and to so many others for your support and solidarity. On that note, I also want to thank the organizations and groups that are supporting this event. It's being hosted by the Canada Stop Arming Saudi campaign and organized by World Beyond War, Mobilization Against War and Occupation, and Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice. But it's also been endorsed by a number of other organizations who have also been so much a part of the ongoing work in solidarity with Yemen. So thank you to the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, Labor Against the Arms Trade, the Yemenite community in Canada, Palestinian Youth Movement Toronto, Just Peace Advocates, Science for Peace, Canadian BDS Coalition, Regina Peace Council, Nova Scotia Voice of Women for Peace, People for Peace London, and Pax Christi Toronto. So without further ado, I'd love to get us started. I'm so excited to hear from this truly incredible panel of speakers we have lined up today. The format for this event is I'll introduce each of them, who will each in turn present to you all. And then after they've done so, we will do some actions in solidarity together. One of which will involve everyone holding up a sign so we can take a group photo. I'm letting you know now, so if you'd like to take some time over the next hour or so to prepare it, you're welcome to. It's completely optional. This is mine for reference to give an idea. And we'll be doing that after all of the speakers have spoken. And then we'll also have time for a Q&A. So at any point during this event, I would invite you to write any questions you have for one or several of the speakers in the chat, and we'll get to them after all the speakers have spoken, or we'll get to as many as we can. So again, thank you so much for joining us today for this event that really intends to take a hard look at Canada's role in the ongoing crisis, the ongoing war and violence and devastation in Yemen. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first guest. Shireen Aladimi is a professor of education at Michigan State University and a powerful advocate working to encourage political action to end US and Canadian support for the Saudi-led war on her country of birth, Yemen. Shireen, it's a pleasure to have you here and to hand you the stage right now. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and for everybody who has made time out of their Saturday afternoon to be here with us today, and to all the wonderful speakers that I'm really excited to share the stage with. I'm going to share some slides and talk through what's happening in Yemen and Canadian complicity in the war on Yemen. But just to introduce myself a little bit more, I was born in Yemen, I was raised there, and then my family and I moved as refugees to Canada when I was 12. So I'm from London, Ontario, as well as Yemen. And I moved to the US as an adult, and I'm across the border now in Michigan. So I want to mark that today it's been 2,256 days since the international community essentially launched a war against the country of Yemen. So this is over 6 years now. And Yemen is this country in the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. I wanted to get straight to why there's so much interest for the international community in bombing and blockading a country that frankly doesn't even have the kinds of capabilities that these countries have. So even to call this a war is a misnomer, because wars imply that there's some kind of symmetry, some kind of reciprocity. Whereas this is more, an attack, a unilateral attack with, of course, indigenous resistance, but not really a war. But Yemen is at the tip of the peninsula, and it controls Bab el-Mandeb Strait, where about 6.2 million barrels of oil and oil products travel per day. And it's not just oil, but it's also international shipping. So you see this arrow going both ways, and it's because this is where shipping needs to go to Europe and to the United States, Canada, as well as to Asia. And so it stands at a really important strategic location. And countries like Saudi Arabia essentially got nervous when the rise of Ansarullah in Yemen back in 2014 and 2015. So the causes are many, and that's a whole other presentation. But there has been since the start a policy of targeting and blockading civilians in Yemen. So there was a 2016 UN report that stated that the targeting of civilians was widespread and systematic. And what this means is that after destroying Yemen's air force within the first few hours of the war, the coalition began to target civilian areas, including hospitals and homes and schools and mosques, factories, gatherings like funerals, weddings, markets, moving vehicles. No place is safe in Yemen. The coalition also targets food and water facilities quite intentionally. For example, factories, plants, agricultural, and infrastructure like roads and bridges. In addition to this targeting, there has been a blockade that's been imposed on Yemen since 2015. Now, there are all but 2 airports remain open, none of them in the northern part of the country where over 70% of the population lives. Commercial trade has been severely restricted, and this is a country that used to rely on 90% for imports. And this resulted in about 80% of the population, or 24 million people, being reliant on foreign aid. And even aid then has been used as a weapon of war in this conflict. And under the guise of an arms embargo, the Saudi-led coalition uses UN Security Council Resolution 2216 to justify their naval blockade, but they also have an aerial and land blockade that's been imposed on the country. So essentially, they dictate everything that's coming into the country. They decide what gets in and what doesn't. A fuel blockade recently has turned hospitals into non-functioning entities, essentially, and as well as all the other needs for fuel. So what does this mean? This means that Yemen is now the world's worst humanitarian crisis. 112,000 people at least have been killed in the violence. These are just documented sources, and it's very hard to document the actual casualties of war, which are, this I think represents just a fraction of the cost, the humanitarian cost. 131,000 plus deaths have been from starvation or people's lack of access to healthcare. 50% of Yemenis are on the brink of starvation. Over 400,000 children under the age of 5, so between ages 0 and 5, are currently starving, with one child dying every 75 seconds. And this is largely due to the blockade. Over 4 million people have been displaced internally. And the reason you don't hear about a Yemeni refugee crisis is because most people are trapped within because of the blockade. 80%, like I said earlier, need humanitarian assistance just to survive. 70% don't have adequate access to healthcare or even clean drinking water. So diseases like cholera and diphtheria have seen a resurgence in Yemen with, the highest numbers in modern history. Half of all Yemeni children suffer from stunted growth. And there's the highest case fatality rate in Yemen regarding to COVID, with 30% of people. Again, the numbers are low because it's difficult to trace and to track and to test, but those that we know about, the case fatality rates are quite high. So Canadian complicity, of course, has been central to this. Canada had a $15 billion deal that was negotiated under the Harper government, but finalized by Trudeau government. And it provides light armored vehicles, or LAVs, to Saudi Arabia, but it also exports weapons and military equipment to the UAE, which is also Saudi Arabia's partner in this war in Yemen. And a 2020 UN report, Human Rights Council report, implicated Canada for perpetuating the war in Yemen, given that they are arming the side that is bombing and starving and blockading civilians. To zoom in a little bit on General Dynamics Land Systems in Canada, they're a subsidiary of General Dynamics Corporation, which is a US corporation. And it, like I said, it manufactures light armored vehicles, and it's based in my hometown of London, Ontario. General Dynamics Corporation has also been implicated in war crimes in Yemen generally. So they're in the top 5 of Yemen war profiteers. And they've made over $124 million in weapons and parts sold to Saudi Arabia in the past decade. And again, this is only Saudi Arabia and not the UAE. General Dynamics guidance system was attached to a 500-pound bomb that killed 44 Yemeni schoolboys in 2018. You may have heard about this. And of course, this is a war crime among many, many other war crimes. And this was just one of the ways that General Dynamics has been involved in war crimes in Yemen. But I invite you to read a report by Alex Kane in these times that details General Dynamics and other companies' complicity, as well as this Human Rights Watch report about General Dynamics and their complicity. I also wanted to note that they haven't really been paying the Canadian government what they're owed. So there was this report from 2019 showing that the Saudi shortfall was about $3.4 billion in its payment for those Canadian labs. Now, some would argue that, well, Canada has been providing humanitarian assistance to Yemen, And I want to note that this assistance has totaled $295 million in the past 6 years. Also, this represents about 2% of the $15 billion deal that Canada has with Saudi Arabia. And I also want to bring out this quote by Jan Englund, who is the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, who this year said it's outrageous that aid organizations have to beg and scrape the barrel to provide the bare minimum food to help keep Yemenis alive, when the countries who wage war and cause so much of the suffering are still willing to spend magnitudes more on the fighting. And I think this highlights Canada's dual role here. So what justification does Justin Trudeau have? What has he said about Yemen in the past 5 years? At least on Twitter, he has said absolutely nothing from either his personal account or his Canadian PM account about Yemen, not a single tweet. But his foreign minister at the time, Chrystia Freeland, has been tweeting about Yemen. And in all of these tweets, she expresses concern, calls for ceasefire. Meanwhile, Canada continues to arm the side that is causing so much death and destruction in Yemen. So what does it mean to end Canadian complicity in war crimes? I think it's time for Canada to shift away from mimicking US complicity and US foreign policy, and to have our own policy that doesn't necessarily reflect the interests of the United States. Job creation should not be at the expense of people's lives anywhere. So some would argue that, of course, this is very lucrative for Canadians, but at what expense and at whose expense? Discord between Canada's stated values of human rights and concerns for human rights. We know that, these are not Canadian values. We just introduced this talk with, the idea that our country was founded on genocide and stolen land. But this discord between the stated values and our government's complicity must be challenged fervently and frequently. And so I'm going to end here, and I look forward to your questions, but you can also feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, where I focus on Yemen, as well as my email address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shireen, for that incredible amount of information and so well presented in such a short period of time. Such an excellent start to this event by grounding us in what's happening on the ground. What has that looked like? How is Canada involved? And I know it's a great introduction to us getting more into that throughout this event. I'm seeing some questions already in the chat. We will be keeping those and bringing them forward again at the end. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Ahmed Jahaf, a Yemeni journalist and artist based in Sana'a. If you've been seeing solidarity actions and posts online globally in solidarity with Yemen, you've seen his art. It's everywhere and it's incredibly powerful. It's an honor to have him here with us today. And I also want to thank Mohammed, as I mentioned again, who will be doing some interpretation for Ahmed. So Ahmed, welcome.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So can I speak in English or in Arabic? What do you like?
It's entirely up to you. You can switch back and forth. You can speak whatever language you like. Thank you.
Okay, I'll speak in English very fast. My name is Ahmed Jahaf. As you said, I am a graphics and designer. I live in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen. I want just to see that the people of Yemen, they don't see only Saudi Arabia is the war crime in Yemen. We know that Saudi Arabia is not alone in this war. We see all the countries which they are supporting Saudi Arabia, they are a part of this war. They are a war criminal. So we know all the countries that supporting Saudi Arabia, the countries which they are selling arms to Saudi Arabia, like US, UK, Canada, and many countries. We know that they don't want to stop the war because the war in Yemen means millions of dollars for all the governments of many countries. So we don't see only Saudi legislation is our criminal. That's mean all the, we see all the world are fighting in Yemen, not just using arms, but other countries, they are just silent of the war crimes. So we want just to send a message to all the governments that's supporting Saudi Arabia, that's supporting Saudi-led coalition. It is a time to stop supporting this. It is a time to stop the war in Yemen. It is more than 6 years. It is enough supporting all these war crimes, enough for this war. Stop supporting Saudi Arabia. Stop all the arms deals. We don't want just to stop the deals for just a few months, and then you continue the past deals. So do something, not just say something to the governments like what you said. They want to stop the war, but they don't. So I hope this war stop soon, and all the governments do something in real to stop supporting this war and Saudi-led coalition. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ahmed. Since you're in Sana'a right now, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what does it feel like in the city right now? How are things going for the city and for everyone?
Okay. After 6 years, the people of Yemen, they are not like a few years ago. I can't speak it in Arabic, it's better. محمد؟
تفضل.
الحياة في اليمن تغيرت، يعني ليست كما كانت في بداية الحرب. اليمنيون أصبحوا الآن معتادون على الوضع الذي يعيشون فيه، الأمانة. فأصبح الوضع يختلف نوعا ما. أصبح الوضع عندما يمر 2 3 ولا نسمع صوت الغارات، كان هناك شيء غريب ليس كالمعتاد.
So the life in Yemen has changed considerably over the last 6 years. We have learned to adapt to our situation, to the point where when 3 days pass and we don't hear any airstrikes, we feel that something is wrong. Something is different this time.
أما بخصوص المجاعة والأمراض التي تعاني منها اليمن، فالوضع يزداد سوءا يوما بعد يوم. الدكتورة شيرين تحدثت حول الأزمة الإنسانية التي تعيشها اليمن، ولكن الوضع خلال كل يوم يمر هناك الأزمة تزداد بشكل كبير، ونلاحظ هذه الأزمة في جميع الأحياء والشوارع التي نعيشها في صنعاء خاصة، وفي المحافظات الأخرى عامة.
As for the humanitarian and health catastrophe that's happening, unfortunately, it is getting worse day by day. As Shireen has, portrayed with all the numbers, information, it's getting much, much worse over time, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's not only within Sana'a, but also towards other provinces and governments as well.
كيمنيين نحن نتمنى حاليا أن يتم فك الحصار. هذا أول شيء، أن يتم فك الحصار عن اليمن. فنحن نعيش الآن أزمة في المشتقات النفطية بشكل خانق جدا. فالمشتقات النفطية لم تدخل إلى اليمن منذ ما يقارب 3 أشهر حتى الآن، وأصبحت بعض المحطات الكهرباء شبه متوقفة، والحديدة أعلنت بأنها سوف تتوقف محطات الكهرباء. فهذه أزمة كبيرة ستحدث إن لم يتم السماح للمشتقات النفطية بالدخول، ويتم فك الحصار للدخول في إجراءات حقيقية لوقف الحرب.
One of the more severe things that are happening is the fuel blockade that's happening, which has been going on for more than 3 months, which has led to major power outages, and power stations one after the other are closing down, and the Yemeni people demand an end to the fuel blockade on Yemen, as it is catastrophic for human life.
هذه الحياة الآن في اليمن، وأي سؤال تفضلوا أنا جاهز.
This is what life in Yemen is like. And if there are any other questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you so much. We will have time for audience questions at the end, but while you're speaking now, I'd love to ask another question, which is, as someone who has seen your art and has admired it and has also seen it being shared all over the world at so many protests and actions against this violence, I wonder if there's anything you would like to share about the role of the artist or how you have been able to take action as an artist in this.
بخصوص الفن أو الرسومات الذي أقوم بها، هي كانت عبارة عن وسيلة للدفاع عن اليمن، السلاحي الذي استخدمه في الدفاع عن اليمن. الحقيقة أنه هناك كان دعم كبير منكم جميعا ومن جميع الناشطين في الخارج، استمريت في هذه الرسالة، وأتمنى يعني أن تكون الرسالة وصلت للجميع. قد تكون هذه الرسالة رسالة سلام للعالم لنقل معاناتنا وفي نفس الوقت رسالة سلام. وأشكر لكم دعمكم وشكرا.
To me, the art and the tools of art is a tool of resistance. And it is thanks to all the support I've been getting from activists all around the world and movements around the world to fight for justice for Yemen that I feel that I can continue to produce art. And I am both inspired and motivated by the support I've been getting around the world. And I hope that the message that I was trying to deliver was delivered successfully.
Thank you so much. And I see that Shireen has shared the link to Ahmed Jahaf's website and art in the chat, and we'll also send it out afterwards. And if you saw the poster for this event, it also includes some of his art. It's incredibly powerful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, I would love to welcome to the stage Hamza Shayban, who's the president of the Yemeni community of Canada, and who has led many initiatives to raise awareness of the Saudi-led war against Yemen and to advocate powerfully for Canada to end its multi-billion-dollar arms deal with Saudi Arabia. So Hamza, thanks for joining us and welcome.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks everyone who was with us today to speak about Yemen. Special thanks should go to Rachel and Simon for being very active and very supportive to end the arms sales of Canada to Saudi Arabia. Before I start, one thing that really made me wear the hat of an activist is because at a point I felt that Yemen is truly a forgotten war. If you all remember when the war was at its peak in Syria, all news channels, journals and different sources were talking about the war in Syria. But when it comes to Yemen, it's definitely forgotten and it's not giving much attention as it's supposed to be. So I visited Yemen in 2016. I still have my family living there, and I visited them in 2016. And so many things have changed since I moved to Canada. Starting from the journey, going from Yemen to Canada used to take me almost 17 hours travel time. But now it would take me more than 34 hours because of the blockade imposed on the airports. And I have to travel from one city to another to catch the flight that would go outside to Egypt. And then from there, I'll need to find flights that will take me to Canada. One of the first things that really hit me when I went to Yemen in 2016 is that as a kid who was raised in Sana'a, the capital city, I have so many memories for places like my school that I used to go to, places where I used to hang out with my friends, houses and streets of my relatives and my friends where they live. And it was very shocking and heartbreaking when I saw that, many places in Sana'a were targeted and it's places where civilians live. You'll pass by buildings that are half destroyed, houses that used to be there, but they're not there anymore because they were targeted by missiles or bombs. So that was the first thing that really hit me when I went back to Yemen in 2016. But I also was personally affected by this war, and I've lost 4 of my cousins because they were targeted by a missile or a bomb. I'm not quite sure what was it exactly. I've lost friends and a neighbor of mine, and my neighbor. The way he died, he was in a funeral, and where more than 800 people were there. And believe it or not, the funeral was targeted with 2 missiles, and over 150 people were killed and the rest were injured. But also a personal experience that I would like to share with you tonight is that, one day I remember I was just sitting in the living room, and suddenly I heard an explosion, but it was very abnormal to a point where I literally lost control over myself. I wasn't able to think for a second. I wasn't quite sure what's happening. And I totally forgot that I was in a country where there is a war and you're expecting to hear a missile or a bomb and you're not safe. But it was very loud and very terrifying to a point where I totally forgot that. And 2 seconds after that, I remember like all the windows around me were blown away. And still, I was sitting on the couch. I felt nailed to that couch. I kid you not, I wasn't able to move, not because I didn't want to move, but I totally just lost control over myself. And then I remember my nieces and my nephews started screaming and running down the stairs. They were running towards me. They started hugging me and trying to hide behind me. And that's when I felt like, okay, something definitely not right over here. So I took them to the room next to the living room. And I kid you not, for a minute or two, I wasn't able to speak. Like I totally lost my ability to speak. This experience definitely left its mark on me. And this is definitely one of the things that I'll never forget till the day I die. And I really hope that none of you will have to go through this experience. But this is just something that Yemeni people go through on a daily basis. Well, afterwards, I discovered that the missile targeted a place which is almost 2 or 3 kilometers away from my home. So you could imagine, like it wasn't really close to my place, that close. Almost 2 or 3 kilometers is not really close to you, but it was like, it felt like it was my home that was targeted. So you could only imagine what, like people who were very close to that place, how bad they were affected by this, or even people who are at that place. It's very, very terrifying. And one thing that really after that made me start thinking about is, people always talk about, the casualties, buildings destroyed, people who lost their lives. But one aspect that really, people slightly not taken in consideration is that the psychological impact that these weapons leave on people. It's very harmful. A lot of kids in Yemen today, they lost their ability to speak, to listen, to even go to school and learn because of what they've seen or what they've experienced. And we're talking about a nation that has that more than 10 million people are under the age of 25. So the psychological impact is very, very damaging when it comes to war zones. I also would like to share what happened with my cousin. So my cousin lives in an area where it was heavily bombed.
I'm so sorry, we can't hear you at all right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to our next speaker and then we'll come back to you. I'm so sorry, but we just cannot hear at all. And that'll give you time maybe to reconnect and fix the connection. Sorry about that, Hamza. We'll definitely come back to the rest. We all want to hear the rest of what you're saying. For right now, I want to thank you for so powerfully sharing the terrible experiences that you've witnessed, that your family has witnessed, and your role in advocacy around this issue. And I can see that everyone has been deeply impacted by what you've shared today. And we'll come back to you in just a few minutes, and hopefully the internet issue will resolve. In the meanwhile, I'm gonna invite up Simon Black, an organizer with Labor Against the Arms Trade and a professor in labor studies at Brock University, to talk a little bit more about the labor issue and the fact that these weapons are being made by workers in Canada, and maybe talk about some of the actions in connection to that. Thank you so much, and welcome, Simon.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Shireen, Ahmed, Hamza. Greetings, brothers and sisters, friends, comrades. I'm an organizer with Labor Against the Arms Trade, which is a coalition of peace and labor activists working to end Canada's participation in the international arms trade. And what I want to do today is really answer two questions. Why should trade unions oppose arms exports to Saudi Arabia and the UAE? And what has the labor movement done, and what should it do to oppose these exports? To answer the first question, quite simply, unions should oppose war. War is the enemy of working people. It is poor and working class people, not the rich, who fight and die in war. It is the super rich, the war profiteers, the big corporations, General Dynamics, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, who get richer as a result of war. Labor must be a voice for a just and sustainable peace. Second, it's a question of international solidarity. Unions should always side with the oppressed, whether here or halfway around the world. This is not just a moral imperative for labor, it is a political one. We cannot expect workers in other parts of the world to stand in solidarity with our struggles if we do not stand in solidarity with them. But why should Canadian unions in particular oppose arms exports to Saudi Arabia? Of course, what we've heard from the previous speakers is the unions cannot be silent in the face of this devastation wrought by the Saudi UAE coalition's horrific war in Yemen, which has led to the world's worst humanitarian crisis. But also because Saudi Arabia is an enemy of unions and workers' rights. Saudi Arabia consistently ranks in the International Trade Union Confederation's top 10 worst countries in the world for workers' rights. Were Saudi Arabia not engaged in Yemen, not bombing the Yemeni people, unions would still oppose, and we would still oppose arms exports to Saudi Arabia on these very grounds. But there's another reason that unions must take a strong stand against these exports. And here I want to make links between Labor Against the Arms Trade's two current campaigns, one to stop arming Saudi, and our call with Labor for Palestine for a two-way arms embargo on Israel. From the 1960s onwards, Saudi Arabia and Israel both emerged as the Western powers, the US, UK, and Canada's bulwark against two anti-imperialist movements in the region, Arab nationalism and socialism. And it's no surprise that two of the biggest recipients of Western military aid in the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa, is the State of Israel and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Whether historically or in the context more recently of the Arab Spring, Saudi Arabia has played a role in crushing progressive movements in the region and propping up dictatorial regimes that crush unions and workers' rights movements, while exporting an extremely conservative, a very right-wing interpretation of Islam, the equivalent to the anti-union right-wing evangelical Christianity that is the base for Trumpism in the United States. So when it comes to issues that the labor movement fights for, whether it be workers' rights or gender equality or democracy in the workplace or people's right to democratic self-determination, including the Palestinian people and the Yemeni people, Saudi has continually been a force for reaction. So what have unions done and what can they do to oppose these arms exports, given what I've just laid out, what the previous speakers have laid out? You know, in 2019, we saw dock workers both in the port of Marseille in France and the port of Genoa in Italy refuse to load arms onto the Bahari Yambu, which is the national shipping line of Saudi Arabia. These arms were destined for Saudi and to be deployed in Yemen. Activists had tried, anti-war activists and arms control activists in those countries had tried to protest through the courts, stating that the shipment contravened UN laws. A French judge it actually dismissed the legal case, but what the power that workers have is that power in the workplace to refuse to go along with the work of loading those ships. And nevertheless, despite the French legal case falling through, dock workers in Marseille made sure that the Bahari Yambu left without cargo. And similarly, Genoese workers, the port of Genoa in Italy, refused to load generators onto a Saudi ship in protest against the war. That was in 2019. In 2018, in December, anti-war activists in the port of near the port of St. John in New Brunswick established a peace picket. It was a peace picket that was set up early in the morning because a Saudi ship was due in port that day, and light armored vehicles were ready to be loaded onto that ship. And members of the International Longshoremen's Association, which is the union which represents the dock workers at the port of St. John, they actually refused to cross the picket line that day. And for one day only, Canadian-made light armored vehicles manufactured by General Dynamics in London, Ontario, could not be loaded onto the waiting Saudi ship. What happened as a result of that action, that brave action those workers took, was that their employer, the Port of St. John, took the union to court, and the union's been stuck now with a huge fine for the courageous action of the dock workers that day. Those actions in solidarity with the Yemeni people and with anti-war activists and arms control activists around the world. You know, in Canada, we've worked very hard as Labor Against the Arms Trade to work and really take direct action against arms exports. We've worked alongside our allies like World Beyond War Canada and other allies, Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, People for Peace London. And we've taken a number of actions where we've actually blockaded Saudi-bound weapons. We've blockaded rails in London outside of the General Dynamics plant. And we've blockaded trucks at a Hamilton area. Hamilton is in just about half an hour outside of Toronto. There is a transport firm there by the name of Earl Paddock International, which has a contract with General Dynamics to be transporting the light armored vehicles to port on flatbed trucks. And we did take action with Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War and World Beyond War Canada to blockade and picket trucks, to impose economic costs on any company we see that is complicit in the war in Yemen and complicit in Canada's arms exports to Saudi Arabia. We've worked hard to get the Canadian labor movement on board, and the Canadian Labour Congress, which is the largest labor organization in Canada, which represents more than 3 million workers across the country, has publicly opposed arms exports to Saudi Arabia and has called for a just transition for arms industry workers. Should we be successful, and I think we will be, we're going to continue to fight to be successful in ending arms exports to Saudi. Arms industry workers should see, as the labor movement has argued, should see a just transition, that those workers should have other opportunities other than manufacturing weapons of war. There's been other unions who have taken a stand against arms exports to Saudi in solidarity with the people of Yemen. The Canadian Union of Public Employees, Canada's largest public sector union, a number of provincial public sector unions, the union that represents postal workers in Canada, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, a a small union by the name of Workers United. All of these unions have expressed public opposition to arms exports to Saudi Arabia and have participated in one way or another in a number of pan-Canadian days of action that we and our allies have organized. The labor movement and its closest political ally, the New Democratic Party under the leadership of Jagmeet Singh, has also publicly stated opposition to arms exports to Saudi Arabia. Now, there's an important exception to growing labor opposition to arms exports to Saudi. And I started off by saying it's the rich who ultimately benefit from wars, but some working people, like those in the arms industry, at least in the short term, seem to think they have a material interest in the war machine. So the important exception to this union opposition to arms exports to Saudi has been Unifor, which is Canada's largest private sector union. Unifor represents the workers at that very plant that Shireen was mentioning in her presentation, the General Dynamics Land Systems plant in London, Ontario, which manufactures the light armored vehicles that Canada exports to Saudi as part of a $15 billion deal, the largest military contract in Canada's history. Now, while Unifor has a very proud tradition of social justice and international solidarity, it has not found its voice, to put it politely, on this issue. And this perhaps reflects the union's worry about job loss in London, but it also reflects the current state of the leadership of that union. That union has been under much more progressive leadership in the past and has taken under other leadership, has taken very principled stances against arms exports as well. So it's not that that union doesn't have it in it to oppose these arms exports. Now, the union leadership may have a terrible position on these arms exports to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but I think one thing that we should think about is that if you were to stand outside the factory gate as workers at General Dynamics Land Systems Canada were leaving their shift, and you said, if you asked them the question, would you prefer to be making the technologies and products that society needs to confront the climate crisis, like high-speed rail or wind turbines or other green technologies, or continue making weapons of war bound for Saudi Arabia and its brutal war in Yemen? I can bet you would not find a single worker who says that they would prefer making weapons of war. You know, working class people tend to have a better moral compass than our prime ministers. But those workers don't have that choice. And that's what we in Labor Against the Arms Trade will continue to fight for. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Simon, for linking back up with labor angle on how we actually oppose this, how this is in the interest of workers, and really laying out what's ahead of us and the fight that we're committed to. I would love to go back to Hamza right now. We were so sorry that you were interrupted, and we'd love to hear the rest of what you had to say. Thank you.
Yeah, Rachel, thanks. I'm sorry about that. Sorry, Rachel, could you please let me know where exactly I started cutting off?
I think you were talking about, I think you were just starting to maybe make the connection back to Canada and having had the experiences that you had when you visited Yemen and then maybe back in Canada.
Yeah.
I think you were just starting to talk about what you realized about the Canadian arms trade, but it was hard to tell where you cut off.
Sorry, my that was and the baby was that when doctors were very stressed because of the war, or it could be because there were some chemicals in the weapon that was used that caused that. So, you know, not to take much time, but it's definitely hard to be in Yemen. It's not only in Yemen, but in any country where it's there's a war going on. And thanks everyone for joining us today. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. Again, thanks to Rachel and Simon and everyone in Canada who's supporting us. And let's all work together to make sure that we bring this war to an end and or at least, stop countries and governments from selling arms to Saudi Arabia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hamza, and I'll look forward to hearing more from you in the Q&A portion. Our final speaker for today is Azza Rojbi, a North African social justice, anti-war, anti-racism activist, and author of the book, The US and Saudi War on the People of Yemen. She's a member of the editorial board of the Fire This Time newspaper and has been a key part of the Canada Stop Arming Saudi campaign. Welcome, Azza.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Rachel. First, I want to thank all the speakers before me, Shireen, Ahmed, Hamza, and Simon. Thank you for your very informed and clear analysis. You all certainly made my job easier going after all of you. I think it's very important that Ahmed was able to join us here today directly from Sana'a. Thank you, Ahmed, for being with us. I know it's not easy to be able to access internet and be able to stand up and bring your voice to folks here. All right, everybody, we're back recording. So I wanted to thank Ahmed again for being here with us. And I was honored that Ahmed actually wrote the introduction to my book. And so I'm excited to see you here today. I'm excited that your voice is being echoed by people in Canada and across the world through your art. And I look forward to seeing the continuation of your art. And I also want to make sure to thank all the groups across Canada that came together today to organize, endorse, and support this important webinar and campaign against Canada's arms sales to Saudi Arabia. I won't be talking too much about the dire humanitarian crisis in Yemen. I think the speakers before me have given you a full updated picture of this really horrendous destruction caused by the Saudi-led war against the people in Yemen. I want to elaborate and focus more and expand actually on what was said before me on who's behind the war on Yemen and why. We probably all know March 26, 2021, just recently, it marked 6 years of this criminal and devastating war on Yemen. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and their coalition started this military intervention in Yemen under the guise of restoring what they called legitimacy and stability. When we look today at Yemen, we don't see this so-called legitimacy or stability. All they have brought to Yemen is death and destruction. And it's important also to say that from day one, the United States government and its imperialist allies, including Canada, provided political, technical, military, and training support to Saudi Arabia and other countries in this coalition. Of course, there's the billions of dollars of arms sales, and those billions of dollars of arms sales were not to build Yemen, but to destroy it. There is no way that Saudi Arabia or the UAE could have started this war alone. In fact, they started this war on behalf of the United States. US basically has outsourced this dirty work to Saudi Arabia. The Saudi-led military intervention in Yemen is an imperialist war for domination and hegemony in the region. I want to develop more on this. And for that, I want us to go back to the map that Shireen shared earlier on today and to think back of Yemen's position on the map. Yemen's coast borders the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a narrow, very strategic waterway between the Horn of Africa and the Middle East. As Shireen perfectly showed us and explained using the map about the importance of oil, I want to expand here and go beyond oil. The strait is one of the most active and vital maritime shipping routes in the world. This strategic location is vital for the United States and their imperialist allies to expand their military and economic hegemony over the Middle East and North Africa region. as well as the East African region. As I mentioned earlier on, Saudi Arabia and the UAE are basically doing the dirty work of imperialists in the region, and they also get to have a piece of the cake. As well, taking over Yemen is to complete this strategy of imperialist countries encircling Iran, to isolate Iran and put Iran in a complete defensive position. I want to refer to an article by the Brookings Institution. It's an important and a very pro-United States think tank based in Washington, DC. They published an article actually just yesterday. It's titled, Saudi Arabia and the UAE consolidating strategic positions in Yemen's east and islands, end quote. So this article talks about the different strategic bases and outposts that Saudi Arabia and the UAE have built and continue to be building in different strategic coastal locations in Yemen. The article also refers to the recent satellite imagery. You might have seen them, they were circulating in social media, and they're showing the building of UAE. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, when I say UAE, I'm referring to the United Arab Emirates, a military base that the UAE is building on the island of Mayoun, also located on the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, as we said, and as I've mentioned, a very strategic location. The actions by Saudi Arabia and the UAE and their war on Yemen perfectly fits into the agenda of imperialists. The United States and its allies are using wars and occupation to control the Middle East region and the west of Indian Ocean, to consolidate their military and economic hegemony against Iran, China, and Russia. Yemen is a land of rich history and ancient civilization. And I want to say thank you for all our Yemeni speakers today to share some of your memories from growing up in beautiful cities like Sana'a. Yemen is full of diversity, is full of a complex culture and resilient people. So the potential of an independent, democratic, and powerful Yemen with this very, very strategic location in the MENA region is a threat to the interest of the United States, European imperialists, and of course, their puppet regimes such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and others in the Gulf region. The goal of the Saudi-led war and destruction on Yemen is basically to smash the democratic aspiration of the Yemeni people and their aspirations for an independent, unified, and strong country. By destroying and dividing Yemen, they turn it into a weak puppet government that's always dependent on Western imperialist countries like others in the region. They are doing to Yemen the same thing they have been doing to Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba, just to name a few. In this new era of war and occupation, which started with the occupation of Afghanistan in 2001, the US and other imperialists have imposed wars, occupations, sanctions, blockades to break the will of sovereign nations and force any independent countries to accept their imperialist dictated plans on dominations. And of course, it's important to go back to Canada. Canada has been a very, very faithful companion of the United States in their wars and occupations across the Middle East region. And today also, Canada continues to be complicit in fueling the US Saudi-led war on Yemen. And actually, Saudi Arabia has been the largest non-US buyer of Canadian-made military goods for 4 consecutive years, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and I expect it will be the same for 2020 and 2021. Basically, this government in Canada is making billions and billions off of the Saudi-led war on Yemen. Canada is absolutely very much complicit in this war, in the destruction, in the killings, in the death of tens of thousands of people in Yemen. And I also want to point another link, a direct link that actually Canada has to the Saudi-led bombing campaign. CAA Inc., which is a Montreal-based Canadian company, is known for training fighter jets and drone pilots. The Canada's National Observer newspaper reported in 2018 in an article that CAE has trained US pilots who refueled Saudi fighter jets in mid-air during bombing raids on Yemen. CAE has also trained drone pilots from the United Arab Emirates, whose drones have been deployed in Yemen. So this is a clear indication of Canada's direct link to the bombings on Yemen by Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia can no longer hide their horrific destruction and humanitarian crisis it caused on Yemen. And for this last part of my talk, I want to share my screen to share with all of you some pictures from different actions taking place around the world against this war. So if you bear 1 second with me, I'm just about to share my screen. Can you all see it? Okay, I see nodding heads, so I'm gonna assume it's a yes. So as you can see, those are just some of the pictures that show the overwhelming sentiment of people in Canada, in the United States, and around the world against the war on Yemen. We saw this at the successful Global Day of Action that took place on January 25th, 2021, and I will go on for pictures from that. Here you go. And so as you can see, actions took place actually in different 28 countries. So we're saying tens of thousands of people from 28 countries have joined in 30 plus protests in the online rally, in different rallies in the safe way that they can do it in New York, in California, here in Vancouver, in Hamilton. Basically, people around the world took the street and came together on that January 25th, 2021 to say no to the war on Yemen. And this coming together of anti-war activists and peace-loving people from across the globe to stand against this horrific war on Yemen is very, very inspiring. And referring to the pictures, I also want to say that some of us that helped organize the webinar today and have been working together are here as a reflection of the success of that International Day of Action. We were able to connect with each other, to create networks, and to work together. And that International Day of Action and the work of tireless anti-war activists around the world is helping to build a network of groups and individuals here in Canada, in the United States, and around the world that are committed to continue working together to oppose the horrific and atrocious war on Yemen. I'm going to move on to the next slide. As you can see, there's more different pictures of different protests and action that took place after the International Day of Action, so in the last few months. And a lot of these events were inspired by that success and those connections that were made at the International Day of Action. We need to continue. We need to continue building on this momentum, continue educating, organizing, taking the streets, mobilizing against this horrific war on Yemen. Coordinated and consistent local and international actions, either online or in person, and other campaigning are very vital and important to keep the pressure on our respective imperialist governments to end the war. Here in Canada, we need to continue raising the issue of Yemen among working and oppressed people, students, union, political groups, labor unions, civil societies, organizations, and mobilize all peace-loving people to put pressures on their MP and on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Liberal government to end Canada's arms sales to Saudi Arabia. And I'll go on to the last slide, where you can see some more recent actions that took place across Canada and the United States. And some of them actually are letter delivery campaigns. So actions could go from a care caravan to a protest, to making a beautiful banner marking the deaths of civilians by Saudi Arabia and Yemen, or to delivering a letter to your MP to say that you're opposing and demand the end of this horrific war on Yemen. So we stand with the people of Yemen. They have been suffering for way too long. This war has been going for way too long. The Yemeni people are living under this brutal and criminal blockade and illegal war. We must demand an end immediately to this war, the complete lifting of the inhuman blockade of Yemen, and that all foreign troops and mercenaries leave Yemen immediately. The self-determination and sovereignty of Yemen needs to be respected. The future of Yemen needs to be decided and built on by Yemeni people, not by foreign mercenaries, not by other countries fueling with weapons and money. Against all odds, I'm very confident that we will win, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Azza, for that powerful call to action, showing us what is being done, not just across Turtle Island, but around the world. I think this is the perfect segue into the next part of today. We're going to do a few things before we get to questions quite quickly. The first thing I'm going to ask us all to do, everyone who is willing, is to hold up a sign. And what I'm going to do is, there's more than 100 of us here, so it's going to take me a little while just to take all the photos, so bear with me. But I'm going to have us all hold up a sign. We'll take a picture. We'll use it in a bunch of different places. Okay, I'm going to take a few. So we'll do the first one, 1, 2, 3. Okay, I still have to get another third of you. So we're going to do another 1, 2, 3. Great, thank you so much. As I shared, there's a lot of ongoing advocacy happening around this. I want to really highlight that since the multi-billion-dollar arms deal between Canada and Saudi Arabia was first signed, like really since the day it was first signed, many people, organizations, Canadian civil society, etc., across Canada has been speaking out, has been raising it, protesting against it, doing what they can against it over many years. So this didn't just start now, but it does need to continue. As you saw in the photos, as you heard in Simon's actions, the types of ways that people are showing up in solidarity has really ranged from direct support for folks on the ground in Yemen, and sending donations and money and supplies and support in that kind of way, to things like letter campaigns to MPs, to directly standing in front of the trucks and the train tracks that are transporting these weapons, to thousands of hours of behind the scenes, just very detailed research to try to even understand what's going on. These weapons deals are incredibly secretive, and it takes so much behind the scenes research to find out enough about them to then advocate around it. So I want to name and of course, people supporting Yemeni refugees, people who are part of the Yemeni communities, expat communities in Canada who are doing so much. I can't name it all, but I want to say that there's a lot going on. That said, MPs and the Trudeau government, we know, are feeling the heat right now. We've seen through some access to information documents, frantic emails that they are sending right now back and forth, highlighting when there's going to be protests, when there's going to be a media flurry, what should they say in response? We know they're feeling the heat. So we do think putting some direct pressure on MPs right now is a tactic, one of many, that is worth doing. So in line with that, I'm going to share my screen right now and lead us in something that I'm going to ask everyone who's willing to do together. All right, so for all those of us who are residents or refugees or living in Canada in any way, I'm going to ask you to right now go to the website ourcommons.ca/members. You can just type that into your browser, and I'll talk you through it, and then I'll give you a few minutes to do this. And I'm going to show you how you find your member of parliament's phone number here. We're going to leave them voicemails right here together on the spot. We will share a link after for people who do not have a Canadian government representative of one solidarity action you can do. But we know that getting voicemails, getting their phones clogged up with these messages is much more powerful than an email. So that's what we're doing together. So you're going to go to ourcommons.ca/members. Hopefully you can see what I'm typing on my screen. You're going to put in your postal code. And if you wait a second, you'll see that your member of parliament pops up. Once you click on it, it opens their contact info. You just click on the tab that says contact. And when you scroll down, you see their phone number. So what I'm going to do right now live with all of you is phone my MP, and you can all hear the message that I leave in case you've never phoned your government representative before, just as an example of how you can do that. No one's going to answer because it's a Saturday, but to be honest, they're not answering on weekdays too these days. They are checking their voicemails. So this is what we're going to do. I'm dialing the number and I'm going to put it on speakerphone, so hopefully all of you can see. And then I'm going to pull up a sample script.
Hello, you've reached Julie Darwitz, the Member of Parliament for Davenport. I'm so sorry that we're not able to respond to your call at the moment, but
Are you all
please
able
leave
to
a
hear that?
message with your name and your telephone number, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks so much. At the tone, please record your message. At the end of your message, press 1.
Hello, my name is Rachel Small. I'm a constituent of yours. I'm calling to ask you to join me in demanding the Canadian government end all arms exports to Saudi Arabia immediately. We need to stop fueling the devastation in Yemen. We know that the Saudi-led war on Yemen has already killed almost 250,000 people. Yemen's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world right now. It is unacceptable to me that your government, that Canada, is involved in this arms trade. Please call me back to let me know what action you will take to stop Canada's terrible role in the crisis in Yemen, and I will follow up with an email. Thank you, and I look forward to your response. When you call, I would encourage you to leave your phone number. I actually have called and emailed Julie many times, but when you call your MP, if you're comfortable doing so, I would encourage you to leave your phone numbers if you'd like them to call you back. If you're not comfortable with that, that's completely okay. I also want to let you know that every MP in Canada has received multiple emails from our campaign and from other campaigns with this demand. So you're building on collective demands made on behalf of millions of Canadians already. So right now, I'm going to ask everyone who has a Canadian representative, who has an address in Canada, to go to www.ourcommons.ca/members, find their number, stay on mute, but let's all watch each other making these calls now. We'll give you a few minutes to do that. And my colleague is going to put a link in the chat for those who do not have a Canadian representative, but would still like to use an online tool to email the Canadian government about this issue. And if you have questions, feel free to write them in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone. I see the last few people are just wrapping up. Not to do while we're on this event, but I would also suggest for everyone, especially those who had already made up a sign after this event, to take a photo of yourself, a selfie of yourself with your sign, or get someone else who's with you to do that. And if you use social media, Facebook or Twitter, to send that directly to your member of parliament as another way of amplifying this call to them. Please use the hashtag, and we'll put it in the chat as well, Canada Stop Arming Saudi. So that's all one word, hashtag Canada Stop Arming Saudi, and that's how we're tracking this. As I mentioned, we are emailing back and forth with all of the 300 plus MPs across the country to demand that they clarify what is their stance on this issue. So any constituents who are bugging them on this makes a huge difference. Now I'm really happy to move to the Q&A. We've received a ton of questions. We won't have time to get to them all, but I'd love to bring us to a few. The first question, and a number of people asked variations on this, but I'll maybe lump it into sort of two connected questions for any panelists who want to answer is, why is the UN silent on Yemen's worst humanitarian crisis and war on Yemen? Or if not silent, why have the words war crimes not translated into real action against the countries who are accountable, to make them accountable because of their responsibility in the violence, for example, through the international court? So basically, both questions concern a lack of international action and why we think that's the case. Maybe we'll start with Shireen, and then I'll see if other panelists would like to speak to this question.
Sure. Thank you for that question. And thank you to everybody who actually took the time to call your representatives. I picked up my phone and called my senator here in Michigan as well and left them a voicemail. The question of the UN is a really interesting one. I think we have to be realistic about what the UN does and what jurisdiction they have and what they don't have. And so one thing to note is in 2015, when Saudi Arabia began this war in Yemen with, of course, the full support of the United States, the UK, and others, the UN sided with them. They passed a UN Security Council resolution 2216, which I referred to in my talk, that acknowledged the right of Saudi Arabia to invade Yemen. And the resolution was actually drafted by the Saudis, not challenged in the UN. Russia didn't even oppose it. I think the expectation was that Russia was going to veto it. And they did not. And so it passed in the Security Council right away. And it also called on Saudi Arabia and neighboring countries to impose this blockade, essentially by imposing an arms embargo on checking every single vessel that entered Yemeni waters. And so that's what they've been using to justify the blockade that has resulted. So I think, and the other role that the UN played here is back in 2017, I believe, when Ban Ki-moon was the Secretary General, he put Saudi Arabia on this list of child killers, you may remember, for their role in killing Yemeni children. And within 72 hours, he lifted their name off this list, which is a very symbolic list that doesn't come with any other repercussions. And he, in a press conference, said that he was in fact forced to push their name out of this list because Saudi Arabia was threatening to pull funding from UN programs in Gaza and Syria and other places. And so he felt like in order for them to continue to receive funding from Saudi Arabia, he had to remove their name from this list of child killers. And so the UN on the one hand says they're very concerned about what's happening in Yemen. On the other hand, they're funded by the United States, by the UAE, by Saudi Arabia, and they have very limited control over what actually happens. And so much of what they say is symbolic. They say they're concerned, but they really don't have any way to enforce anything on countries that dictate, UN goals and mandates, unfortunately. So I think Ahmed can also speak to this. I think Yemeni people have lost faith in the UN as an impartial mediator. Certainly it doesn't seem like anybody's on the side of Yemenis when it comes to this conflict.
Thank you, Shireen. Ahmed, would you like to speak to this question about sort of international lack of action to hold anyone accountable?
Yeah, the answer just for money. They are silenced because of money. That's it.
Hamza, would you like to speak as well?
Yeah, sure. So I think the incident that the Ban Ki-moon incident that Shireen mentioned is very important, and it shows that UN is not even playing a neutral role in Yemen. It's playing a very negative role. And to add more to what Ahmed said, I think just like how governments think of this war in a very business perspective, UN does as well. Every year, I think UN collects money under the, they call it donations, but I totally disagree with that. And a lot of this money goes to the, for funding operations for the UN. And this seconds what Ahmed said, which is, they think of this as a business. They're making money out of it. And, as long as the war is there, they're making more money, and there's no benefit for them to stop this war.
Simon, did you want to add to that? As I can't see you right now, so I can't see if you're trying to speak.
Oh, sorry, Rachel. No, I agree with what previous speakers have said. It's important to note, though, when we're speaking to our MPs, or we're trying to get the attention of the Prime Minister, that the UN's Human Rights Council's group of eminent experts on Yemen has said explicitly that Saudi Arabia is possibly, if not complicit in war crimes in Yemen. So while I don't disagree in anything that's been said about the UN, that does provide us, the reports coming out of the group of eminent experts on Yemen does provide us with a tool which we should use when it comes to lobbying our governments and advocating for an end to Canadian arms exports to Saudi Arabia.
And if I may add, that Canada has been specifically named for its role in perpetrating and furthering this violence. Azza, were you trying to mention something as well?
I'll add, I think, all the answers before we really wrapped it up, but I will add that I think, as others said, I think it's important that we use as a tool the United Nations different research and numbers that they release, and we try to use the United Nations, but it's unfortunately, at the end of the day, the United Nations is really not independent of the US foreign policy, is really not independent of the US agenda in the region. And we also know that the United Nations is very much funded by countries like Saudi Arabia and the United States. So there's a lot of pulling behind the scenes that make it that the United Nations cannot be an independent and is not an independent part in this war. But that does not mean that we can't use it as a tool and as a platform to echo the plight of the Yemeni people against the war.
Thank you so much. We are just about out of time at this point. I am noting that there are several questions that concern more about how can we take action, recommendations of on-the-ground groups, further information being requested about what the communication with the Canadian government on this has been, and where we can find info on what companies near each of us are selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. All of that we will follow up with you in a follow-up email to this. There has been a list put together of companies we've been able to identify that are fueling this conflict, that are sending weapons to Saudi Arabia, many of which we've now protested against, but many have not yet. And we would love your help reaching out to, in your own way, your local company that's perpetrating these crimes. And in terms of also some organizations to support on the ground, we will follow up with some great links for that by email. We'll also include the recording for this event. I would encourage you to share it with others who are not able to join us live. I know it's quite late in Yemen right now, and with many other places. Again, when posting about this online, please do use the hashtag Canada Stop Arming Saudi. It is helping to sort of build a real momentum behind this campaign and this call for real action. Or rather for the Canadian government to stop the action of sending billions of dollars of weapons to this situation. So because it is time, I hate to do so, but I am going to wrap up this event at this time. I want to thank so much to each of our speakers for taking the time to be here today and to share their perspectives, their personal experience, their geopolitical analysis, and really help us make this more than about sort of numbers or statistics, but about what's really happening, how we're really involved in it, and what we all need to be doing. I also, again, want to thank the organizations who helped put this together and who endorsed it and are continuing to participate in this campaign. So again, thank you so much to all of you, and have a good day.